My elementary school years were during the late 60s and early 70s, which was also in this nation a time of great ferment and change. Although I will say, comparing that time to this one, I would say that that was, at least through my younger eyes, a time with a great more hope in it than this time. I went to school, though, in my earliest elementary days in Amherst, Massachusetts, which was a place where people believed that things could change in a good way. In second grade, I had a cameo appearance as a piece of trash in a musical about pollution, and we stood on the stage and we held hands and we swayed, and we were convinced that our singing would convince every person in the world to end all of our environmental problems. In third grade, the town opened a new elementary school, and it was a university town after all, so it was in fact an experimental school with rooms, as I remember them, as big as football fields. We had 100 kids in our class, and instead of desks, we had wooden tote boxes with rope handles filled with our belongings, which we carried from one corner to another as we learned our various subjects. It was also a high-tech school. We had both film strips and reel-to-reel players. Our music program was not in desks or rows of chairs. We had this beautiful room with big carpeted expanses and ramps where we could sit around and sing, "Jeremiah was a bullfrog," and "Morning has broken." And then, the summer before fourth grade, we moved. We moved to New Jersey, to central New Jersey, to a school which was a brick structure in the middle of a large, unkept field, and the school itself was surrounded by a playground of asphalt. More importantly, though, the children there were much more sophisticated, and they were much more world-wise than I was. They already had bonds that they had formed with one another. They already had cliques. They already knew that I was new, and I was young, and I was vulnerable. And they weren't very nice. So for 4 years, I had a completely different experience. I went from believing that the world was a friendly, good place and that learning was something fun, to dreading school and hating to go, and finding my own world in the world of books and words and enjoying that, but really having a rapid shift in how I believe the world was. I think many of us understand what that is like, to have a shift in how we believe the world is, to realize all of a sudden that what we thought the world was isn't actually the world in which we live. We all know what that is like in times when perhaps what we do in the world changes, who we're with in the world changes, who we are in the world changes. For example, after a sudden illness, or when we are suddenly differently abled. I was on a play date with another young mother and her 2-year-old on September 11th, 2001. We were chatting and just getting to know each other. This was the first time we had ever gotten together. The kids were babbling and hitting each other over the head with things, the way that 2-year-olds do. And I was actually pretty distracted because on the television there was this program, the Teletubbies, which I had heard about but never seen because we actually didn't have television in our home. And I had heard about it because it was controversial at that time, because one of the characters, this large purple kind of quilted thing, was suspected of being gay because this character carried a purse. And so there was all this controversy. So I was sort of paying attention to this new friend and watching the kids and sort of out of the corner of my eyes trying to get a hint of this purple world here. It was a little surreal, and so I didn't really notice right away that the image on the PBS screen had changed and gone from the image of the Teletubbies to an image of the World Trade Centers crumbling. It took me a little while to really get that. All of a sudden, the world went from purple and funny and silly to gray and scary, and it was just like that. My other very clear memory of that day was driving home with my son in his car seat behind me, stopping at a streetlight and wondering if the people of Arab descent in our nation would then have the same experience that my father's family of Japanese descent had had after Pearl Harbor, and being very, very afraid. When we encounter something that we don't expect, something which defies the way that the world is supposed to be for us, we are often very unsettled. We wonder when the world is going to return to what it was before, the way it's supposed to be, the natural order. It takes us a while to realize sometimes that it may never actually go back to exactly what it was before. We feel unsure. We don't know what we want. And we can begin to shut down and disconnect and pull away from this new unwanted reality, the way that the Fisher King does in the story that we had in our Time for All Ages. We live in a time when many, many people have never gotten back the economic surety they had before the recession of 8 years ago. We live in a time when many people are living longer than the resources they had planned to have support them will let them live comfortably. We are living in a time in which the kind of work that you do may be very different than anything you might have thought you would do when you were thinking about what you might do for a living, and certainly a time when it seems unlikely that you will work in a single place for all of your life, the way that some people's parents or grandparents did at one time. We are living in a time when identity is changing and becoming more complicated and nuanced, in a time when the world, which once seemed so far away, is really now much more immediate and accessible and wondrous, and also its terrors very near and scary. I took a flight back from Chicago, from Midway Airport to Oakland, which I do a couple times a year. I did this in July, and it was actually a pretty calm flight. I noticed two things on this flight. The first thing was I became really aware suddenly in this flight of the way that the world of flying has changed, and the way that we get on the plane and we sit on the plane and we get off the plane often without ever exchanging a word with the people sitting next to us. And in modern plane experience, I want to say the people are sitting next to us, like 2 inches or less next to us. And it's odd to realize we can get on and off of that experience without ever exchanging a word with another person sitting next to us. So I was conscious of that. But the other thing that caught my attention was when we landed, because the plane came in, and all of a sudden we were in Oakland, and all of a sudden the plane hit the runway, and we bounced down and then up and then down and then up, and then there was a screeching of brakes, and then we were trying to stop, and then we were stopping. And one of the flight attendants said, "We landed." We had indeed landed, in a way we did not expect, in the same way that life lands us in situations we do not anticipate. These last months, I believe, have reminded us that we've landed in a world that differs from the world that we would construct if we were in charge of such things. We have landed in a world in which it seems as if things are not as they should be, and this can make us feel despairing. And we can start to disconnect because it doesn't match the world of our expectations. We can start to feel like the Fisher King, impotent and powerless and unable to act. Many, many observers are increasingly talking about the fact that people are having wide gaps between what they believe the world should be and what their world actually is. And that in this gap is a big disconnect that actually is causing them to dissociate from their life and not engage in it. We disconnect in many, many different ways. By buying things we don't actually need, by watching a lot of things which might be amusing in small doses, but we watch them in really big doses, by becoming trapped in our own inner worries, in an ongoing tape that's playing in our head that blocks out everything else from the world. Because we live in a world with new dangers, and new forms of violence. Flaming one another, we've learned, is very easy electronically. And those who have historically been the victims of hate in our society are now finding themselves more and more the focus of digital vitriol. There was a recent issue of Time magazine which highlighted the growth of trolls, or people who target and abuse and mock and really victimize people that they disagree with. And what was so interesting was the researchers who went behind the scenes to try to discover who these people are found that they weren't who we have always kind of hoped they were, antisocial people sitting in their basement with no life. Some of them were teachers and doctors and lawyers and professionals who were using this disconnection from who they were in their day life to give voice to an incredible amount of hatred. A female commentator on NPR recently shared that she was stalked by a man who threatened to rape and behead her for speaking about women's issues on the air. This is the word in which Microsoft's AI bot became racist and abusive within 24 hours after it was programmed to learn to speak by mimicking the talk patterns that it heard on the internet. This is the world in which people in the helping professions increasingly say they are overwhelmed by the amount that they are having to take in. And it is also the world in which some scientists are now talking about despair because they thought their career would be about alleviating harm, and instead they are documenting harm being done to species who are disappearing from our midst. That Fisher King, lounging on his couch, may need to move over so that we can join him in his despair. Or we may want to make another choice, because disconnection is a choice, and the other choice is connection. Engaging in the world in which we have actually landed. Connecting with what gives us in this world meaning, the large meaning and the small frames of meaning as well. Tara Brach tells a story of a Buddhist teacher of hers who drew a black V shape on a white piece of paper and then asked the students what it was. "It's a bird," many of them said, and they all nodded. And the teacher said, "It's a bird in an expanse of the sky." How we see and connect to that deep longing for the spiritual, which is one of the things that makes us human, may be more important in the world in which we have landed than it's ever been before. In this world, we are finding literally many of us are going through our days holding our breath, not breathing, just literally holding in the stress and tension instead of finding ways to let it out. And practices which renew our connection to the larger frames of meaning and the spirit, such as meditation and other awareness building, are becoming more important so that we do not allow this world to literally take our breath away. These sustaining connections are vital. I have noticed in the last couple years that I have two sets of very equally puzzling conversations. One set is with people who say that they would like to do something to help make the world a better place, but they can't do that right now because they're too busy tending to their spiritual lives. And then the other set of conversations is with people who say that they would like to tend to their spiritual lives, but they're too busy making the world a better place. And I want to suggest to you today that that is a false dichotomy, because we cannot sustain ourselves to do what we can do if we do not first do what that meta-meditation teaches us to do, which is focus on our own care first and nourishment as well. It's not an either-or. And for those of us who care so deeply, it is also not foolish. I think that we fear being as silly as a little girl being a piece of singing trash might be, or we fear being the mouse in the cartoon who is saying to the other mouse, "Oh, enough about me. I haven't even asked you yet what it feels like to be in that trap." To connect to the world in which we've landed, you must first connect deeply to your own life within it. I may not be the only one who is dreading hearing some of the hate speech that is bound to ricochet around us in the light of what this day is for many. I hope I will not be the only one who is here tonight at 5 o'clock when we welcome our interfaith neighbors. And I hope that David is not the only one who's there tomorrow night when he talks about spiritual health, and that David Sammons is not the only one when he connects us to our history and theology, and that I will not be the only one on Wednesday for our new meditation space, or next Saturday for the Life as It Is retreat, because I believe this is a time when we must be conscious of how we connect. This is, for all its beauty and all its frailties, the world in which we live. This is our only life in the world in which we live. Today, let us use this day, whatever others may use it for, to take the risk of connecting to our spirit, to our world and sense of justice, to all of our dreams, and in that way, close the gap between the world that we talk about and dream of and the world in which we live. Let's connect it bird by bird and sky by sky.